Welcome to this explainer, where we're unpacking some fascinating research from Manhattan Mental Health Counseling on the hidden costs of pornography. Today, we're diving into something that's literally everywhere in our digital lives, but, almost never talked about without a ton of moral baggage. So we're going to strip all that away. We're looking strictly at the clinical and neurological realities. It's a genuinely mind-blowing look at what's actually happening under the hood of our own brains. Now take a look at this. According to SEMrush Traffic Analytics, US pornography sites actually get more web traffic than Twitter, Instagram, Netflix, Pinterest, and LinkedIn combined. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. We always think of ourselves as the society totally hooked on social media and streaming, right? But this data points to a massive, mostly hidden digital epidemic that's operating right beneath the surface. So, here's our roadmap for today. 1. A hidden digital epidemic. 2. Hijacking your brain's chemistry. 3. When habit becomes destructive. 4. The silent struggle for women. And 5. Paths to healing and recovery. Section 1. A hidden digital epidemic. So what really makes this digital addiction so unique today is just the endless availability and the total secrecy our smartphones give us. Clinically speaking, this actually manifests as Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder, or CSBD. Now, while it's not officially in the DSM-5 yet, the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD-11, does recognize it. They define it as persistent, repetitive sexual impulses or behaviors that actually get in the way of your daily life. And as experts point out, this doesn't just spring out of nowhere. It almost always stems from underlying emotional vulnerabilities. We're talking deep loneliness, anxiety, depression, or even unresolved trauma. Moving on to Section 2, hijacking your brain's chemistry. All right, let's talk neuroscience, specifically about how dopamine works when we do things we enjoy. Eating your absolute favorite meal, that spikes your dopamine to about 150% of your normal baseline. Nicotine bumps it up to 200%. Natural sexual activity takes it to 250%. But look at the data for pornography. It actually pushes dopamine way beyond 250%. And here is the absolute kicker. It keeps it spiked for hours. The research notes that even cocaine, literally one of the most addictive substances on Earth, create a sharper spike, sure, but it fades out so much faster. It's this prolonged, marathon-level dopamine flood that makes pornography so incredibly gripping for the brain. So because your brain is getting flooded with this unnaturally high, totally sustained dopamine, it does what any overloaded system would do. It tries to protect itself. This is what we call desensitization. Basically, your brain dials down its receptors, and suddenly your normal baseline is completely changed. And what does that mean for you? Well, it means your brain starts demanding increasingly extreme or wildly novel content just to feel that exact same level of satisfaction. You get stuck in this loop where normal, everyday stimuli and, very often, actual real-world romantic partners just can't compete with that artificially inflated craving anymore. And this desensitization leads us right into the next neurological stage, hypofrontality. When this kind of addiction really takes root, it actually impairs crucial parts of your brain. Specifically, we're talking about the frontal cortex and the anterior cingulate. These are the exact areas in charge of your decision-making and impulse control. So when those get weakened, your brain basically flips onto autopilot. You lose that ability to prioritize long-term, real-world goals simply because your brain is just screaming for that immediate digital relief. Now, if you're thinking this is all just some psychological trick, check out the physical evidence. MRI studies actually show that heavy pornography use is linked to structural changes in the brain. We are literally talking about less gray matter, that's the actual brain tissue you need for complex thinking, and weaker neural connections in the very areas that control your impulses. So this habit isn't just eating up your free time, it's quite literally shrinking the parts of your brain that you rely on for self-control. Section 3. When habit becomes destructive. Once your brain chemistry gets scrambled like this, the behavior naturally escalates. Let's walk through this timeline together. It usually starts off totally harmless with initial use, which is all about instant gratification. But then you hit that massive dopamine spike, causing sensitization, right? The brain starts thinking, hey, I need this to survive. But pretty soon, desensitization kicks in, which brings diminished arousal to normal stuff. And that ultimately lands you at escalating need, pushing you toward more extreme content. And here's the really tough part. When someone actually tries to quit at this stage, they don't just feel kind of bored. They experience very real withdrawal symptoms, intense irritability, restlessness, and just absolutely overwhelming cravings. As the source material so powerfully puts it, addiction is no longer about seeking pleasure, it's about avoiding discomfort.
The brain basically rewires itself to treat that screen as an absolute necessity for relieving pain, anxiety, or stress. And this is exactly where the collateral damage really hits hard. The secrecy around the habit builds this massive wall of emotional distance. It erodes trust and puts a terrible strain on relationships through a really deep sense of betrayal and isolation.
Section 4, the silent struggle for women. We really need to bust the myth that this is strictly a guy thing. If you look at data from a 2019 study, it shows that 11% of men and 3% of women report feeling addicted to pornography. But, and this is a huge but, clinical experts constantly stress that this 3% figure for women is likely wildly underreported. Because society constantly frames this as a male issue, the stigma for women is just immense. The fear of being judged is so paralyzing that countless women are fighting this battle entirely in silence, way too afraid to ever reach out for help. For a lot of women dealing with this, the compulsive behavior is deeply intertwined with past trauma. It basically becomes a coping mechanism, a way to escape painful emotions and numb out distress. But as you can guess, it's a trap. It locks you into this vicious cycle of avoidance, which is immediately followed by crushing self-blame and shame. The clinicians over at Manhattan Mental Health make a really important point here. If you want to break this cycle, healing absolutely has to start with self-compassion. Piling on more shame is just going to make things worse. Section 5. Paths to healing and recovery. The amazing thing about the human brain is that it's incredibly neuroplastic. Just as it can wire itself for addiction, it can completely rewire itself for health. But overcoming this usually takes a bit more than just sheer willpower. Here's some professional therapy approaches that have proven really effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is great for identifying your triggers and challenging that negative self-talk so you can break the habit loop. Then there's dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. That's fantastic for emotional regulation, basically teaching you how to handle distress without immediately running to a screen. For folks whose struggles stem from trauma, EMDR is used to reprocess distressing memories so they lose that intense emotional charge. And finally, mindfulness-based therapy teaches you how to just pause and observe your urges without automatically giving in, essentially helping you turn off that autopilot mode. On a day-to-day behavioral level, people usually take one of two main paths to recover. On one side, some folks choose masturbation without porn. The goal here is simple. Cut out the artificial hyperstimulation and let the brain's reward system naturally recalibrate back to a healthy baseline. On the flip side, we've seen this huge rise in movements like NoFap. Thousands of people in this community go for complete, total abstinence from both porn and masturbation. And they consistently report that this total system reboot gives them the best mental clarity, renewed self-discipline, and helps them rebuild genuine, real-world intimacy. Whichever route you take, the rewards of genuine recovery are absolutely life-changing. When you finally break free from compulsive use, you're not just kicking a bad habit. You're getting so much back. You're getting stronger, more honest relationships. You wake up with this heightened focus and productivity because, hey, your dopamine isn't completely depleted. You see a massive boost in confidence, professional growth, and ultimately, you get empowered self-control. You're finally back in the driver's seat of your own life. I really love this powerful takeaway from the source material. Choosing recovery is choosing yourself. Understanding that compulsive porn use is a behavioral issue can help lift the weight of shame. You know, society feeds us such mixed messages. It normalizes the behavior on one hand, but completely stigmatizes anyone who struggles with it on the other. Recognizing that this is a behavioral and neurological issue, and absolutely not some kind of moral failing, is the real key to neutralizing that stigma and taking your life back. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Knowing everything we just talked about regarding dopamine, desensitization, and how the brain literally physically changes, how might your own daily dopamine-driven digital habits be quietly shaping your brain right now? Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and keep asking the big questions.